Hey everyone, this is Candace from the Hot Bohemian, and today I'm going to attempt to make my first gold-filled bezel gemstone ring. So I have some supplies here for the bezel that I purchased from Rio Grande. I'm going to start by using this plain bezel 1420 gold fill material. This is 1/8 of an inch and it's 30 gauge. So I bought this at on Rio. I bought a foot of it just because I didn't want to, if I messed up, I wouldn't have 5 feet of it left over that I may or may not use. The next thing, and I'm doing a little cheating here because I'm super nervous to purchase sheet metal of gold filled, only because I hear if you saw into the metal, the edges can expose the copper interior of the metal and it could tarnish and change colors. So what I purchased I thought would be a good alternative just to kind of test out creating gold filled rings is this disc. It's a gold filled, the same 14 out of 20. This is a 1/2 inch 22 gauge, about 12.7 millimeters. So it is just a little blank gold filled disc. And so what I plan to do is, using this fast setted emerald, I'm going to create a bezel just how I would with my silver wire, and then I'm going to solder the bezel onto the back of this circle blank. So instead of having to saw a piece from the gold filled sheet metal, I'm just using this just to test it out, because again, I'm still super nervous to work with gold filled. One, because it's very expensive and I wouldn't want to waste the materials, and two, I don't want to do it wrong and have it tarnish. So this one I'm just going to make for myself and wear it to see how it holds up. I'm also using this 10 karat easy solder. This is pure 10 karat gold. This was very expensive for a foot. It was about $30. But this is a good color match is what I've been using when I just make my plain bands for my gold filled rings. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get started by creating this bezel first, and then we'll see where we go from there. So I'm going to go ahead and use my bezel wire. It's a really pretty yellow gold color, and I'm gonna bend it around my stone just how I would if I was using my fine silver bezel. So this seems to bend just as easily as sterling. And what I wanted with this bezel wire is to get the smallest or the thinnest piece, because I didn't want to have to end up shaving off or sanding off a lot of the bezel wire, because I just didn't really want to waste it. I didn't want to be wasteful with it. But here with this gemstone that I'm using, it looks like I'm going to have to regardless. So this bent pretty easy around, so I'm going to make my mark, and then I'm going to cut, sand it, and then line up the edges. Okay, so I worked the ends of the wire, and for the most part I got a pretty snug fit around my cabochon that I'm using. I think the gold and the emerald's gonna look really good together. So you do want to make sure that you get these ends lined up pretty even with no gap in between, because you do not want to have a lot of extra solder, because basically cleaning up these pieces is the tough part of working with gold filled. You want minimal sanding, minimal polishing, because you can sand away the layer of gold that is adhered to the copper. So I spent a little bit of time just making sure these edges are gonna match up perfectly. And so now what I'm gonna do is, I'm debating whether, I think I'm just going to keep it the height so I'm not sanding any of this off, and maybe put a piece of sterling in under the stone to kind of raise it up. I think that's gonna be my best bet because I don't wanna risk sanding off any of the gold and then have it again tarnishing. So I'm gonna leave it like this. What I'm gonna do now is prep it so I can solder this joint right here. And so I have read and looked up ways to make a gold bezel, and let me tell you, there was nothing on the internet, and I searched for such a long time before I started this process right here. So the one thing I did read about is making sure you cover this entire piece with flux, because that's going to prevent fire scale. And another tip is you want to use minimal amount of heat. So I'm going to use my micro torch when I solder the bezel here. Also, you only really want to focus your flame on the spot that you are soldering. So I'm going to go ahead and prep this. So I'm going to flux it, and then I'm going to get it ready for soldering. Okay, so I changed the angle up on the camera because I wanted to show you how I set this up. So I have my bezel and then the tiny piece of solder right there, and I fluxed the entire piece with the flux and even my piece of solder. So the solder is pretty small, maybe 2 millimeters in size. I stuck that right on the joint. And so what I'm gonna do is take my micro torch and go ahead and heat this up, but focus the flame on the piece of solder. All right, so the solder flowed. I do see some fire scale on there, which always makes me nervous, but if this sticks, we just add a little water. I am going to, let's see, you can kind of see some of the fire scale on there. So hopefully some polishing will get this off. Like I said, this is my first time. So I'm going to quench, and I'm going to throw this in the pickle for a second, see if that does anything, and then we're going to move on to setting or soldering this onto the back plate. So I had quenched this piece and then threw it in the pickle, and I wanted to show you that there is some discoloration, that the pickle kind of took the black off. And then I took my pro polishing pad and went ahead and was polishing it, and it looks like it's gonna be okay. I was nervous there for a second. So I'm gonna check my joint, which is here. You can kind of see a little bit of the flux. The solder. I'm not that worried about it. So it looks good. Fits the gem. Perfect. What I'm going to do now is prep this and my disc with a bunch of flux on it, and then just how I would with a sterling piece, I'm going to put the solder all in there and then go ahead and get ready to solder. Okay, so I have my piece set up and ready to go. I'm gonna see if I can zoom in here. So I have 6 pieces of solder, which is all set up around the bezel, and the bezel wire itself is still pink, probably because it pulled some of the copper to the surface of it. That's what happens if you heat it up too high. Unfortunately, I have to heat it up again because I need to get the bezel to stick to the back plate. So I'm going to go ahead and solder this. I'm going to use my micro torch again. It flowed pretty quick last time. Plus, I don't want to bring too much heat to this. Okay, I'm kind of moving the bezel around a little bit. And there we go. The solder has flown, if that's a thing or a phrase. So I'm going to quench, pickle, and see where we're at from there. I still have to make a band, but so far this process is not taking very long. This is sticking. It has a lot of fire scale on it, so hopefully the pickle will take that off. We will see when I take it out. For the band, I am going to use a beaded wire. This is 1.9 millimeter, and I think it's easy wire, so this should bend pretty easy. And they say with the beaded wire that you should wrap it around your mandrel and make it a complete circle, so don't do the D where you make it a half circle and then bend it in, because this can break. So what I'm going to do is make this a size, I was thinking 6.5. So I'm going to go ahead and cut this down and get this ready to form to a ring and then solder. So I have my piece of wire cut to, I think it was 55.5 millimeters. That's going to give me a size 5.5 based on the thickness of this wire. So what I meant earlier when I said not to make a D is you take your ring mandrel and you're just going to wrap it around, and you're literally just going to create a ring until they almost touch. Super simple process. I actually don't know why I don't do this more often with my rings. I usually make the D. And so there you go, perfect circle. And then I still need to file down the ends, and I'm going to solder this right here. And I took my Bezel cup out of the pickle. It's definitely pink after the pickle. So we'll see. I'm gonna solder this beaded band onto the back of this, and then I'm going to go through with a piece of light sandpaper, probably this wet dry sandpaper, and then a polishing cloth, and we shall see if this works. And if it does, this is a pretty nice, easy, inexpensive way to make a gold-filled ring just using one of those gold-filled blanks from Rio instead of buying the sheet metal. It's like I said, the sheet metal, I was going to purchase a 4-inch by 1 inch, and it was upwards to maybe $50-$60. And I didn't want to mess anything up by actually sawing into it. I'm not sure how they treat the edges of the blanks. Sometimes, you know, they were referencing gold plating it so it won't tarnish and bring that copper out. You know, it's just kind of a learning experience. So I'm glad I can share it with all you jewelry makers out there, because I have, this is my first attempt, no idea how to work with gold filled. So this hopefully works out. All right, so here's my plan. I made this ring here by just wrapping it around my mandrel, and I have not soldered this yet, so this is still open here. I'm thinking to put less heat on this piece, that I'm gonna set it up with a piece of solder on the joint and then solder on the side where I want to solder it down, just to kind of have minimal heat on this. So I'm gonna set that up, and then I'll be ready to solder, and then this will be done. So I'll get that set up and then show you guys how that works out. So I have this piece set up here. I'm gonna go ahead and get right in and solder. I have 3 pieces of solder, one on either side of the band, and then one on the band where the joint is that I have not soldered together yet. So soldering this, just gonna focus in on the area that needs to be soldered. And I also fluxed this entire piece, the band and the bezel. I think we're good. So, black. So I'm gonna quench this, I'm gonna throw it in the pickle, and I mean, this is my final product, so I am hoping that everything cleans up and we shall see what happens. So here's the ring out of the pickle. It's almost red-like. I'm gonna get a piece of white paper to see a contrast with this. Okay, so a piece of white paper. So, I mean, you can still see the gold, but it is pretty pink, pretty red. So this is going to fit this hand. I'm going to attempt to clean it up and then set the stone. So I'm going to go ahead and start to sand this area with a very non-abrasive sandpaper, and then I'm going to use a pro polishing pad. Looks like this. These are both from Rio. I'm going to sand this up and we'll see how it looks from there. I'm hopefully have high hopes for this because I prefer gold, and if I can make my own gold filled pieces, that would be amazing. I'd probably keep them all instead of selling them, but I'm gonna get started on this and then I will show you how it turned out. Alright, so I was able to set the stone and polish this ring up, and I am happy with how this turned out. So, for one, I did minimal sanding, and the majority was polished up with this Pro Pad. I feel like it took a lot of the pinkish color away from the copper coming up, and I mean, it turned out pretty well for my first attempt with gold filled. And the blank that I purchased from Rio, so the back plate for this, super easy, and I didn't have to worry about cutting the metal and exposing the copper core. I would recommend maybe trying it out with a backing plate or a gold filled blank. So super happy. Probably gonna keep this first one for myself, and can't wait to work with gold filled in the future. I hope you found this helpful. Let me know if you have any questions or comments. I try to post different techniques on my channel, share my knowledge with all of you out there. So again, if you enjoy this and want to learn more about jewelry making, you can subscribe to my channel and let me know if you have any questions or comments about this process.